Great. Well, thanks for joining. I thought we'd just run through the things that you posted because there was a lot there, and some of this is easier to show rather than just to try to explain async. So,
Yeah.
but it might be helpful to have a sync conversation here. Okay, so some of these I answered in line. Maybe the best way to start is just, have you seen like our vulnerability dashboard or a dependency list or any of our current security features in GitLab?
I have seen them, but I would not say that I understand them.
Okay.
So yeah, maybe a bit of explanation would be awesome.
Yeah, so why don't we start with a demo there, and let's see how many of those questions are covered as part of the demo. So as of today, all of the scanning is done through the CI/CD pipeline. Well, really the CI pipeline. So to get set up, a user comes into their ci.yaml file and they'll include a template like SAST or secret detection or DAST or container scanning. Not all of the different types of scanning are applicable for like container images. Really, container scanning analyzer is the primary one that would be applicable. You could potentially run some form of dependency scan against it as well. But actually most of those findings would be covered by the container scan anyway. So we've got like a whole list of different scanners that we have in GitLab. The takeaway is there's really just one that's pertinent to these container images. In GitLab, those show up in a few different places, but the biggest one that's pertinent for this is the vulnerability report, where as of right now, these all show up. You can filter by status, severity, tool, activity. We have lots of requests for lots more filters. And right now, this UX framework doesn't allow us to add a whole lot of additional filters. So we're in the process of reworking that and designing a more scalable filtering solution. That actually falls under a different team, not my team, but it still is relevant nonetheless. So you can click on these, you can kind of do bulk operations. Some of the scanners tend to find more false positives than others. So especially like bulk dismissing tends to come in handy. The severity is super important. So it's almost always sorted by severity. Usually when people are coming in here though, they're starting with things that need triage. We also by default show things that have been confirmed as true positive. But you asked about like actions to be taken in here. Most of the time, the first action is to figure out, is this a true positive or a false positive, is oftentimes the first question that someone's asking themselves, because especially in context of container scanning doesn't really find a lot of false positives. Like the vulnerability is actually there. But it's another question of, does the application use the vulnerable code? And so does it actually apply, or is that vulnerable code just sitting there on the container image and it's effectively, dead code because there's no way to, like, it never gets called or used during the process. So normally they come in, they start with things that need triaged, and they'll go through and say, okay, well, here's my list. This is a high severity. I'm going to dig into this one more and get some additional details. So you can read the description, you can see which file it came from, which links out to it. You can kind of read up on the details of the specifics of the CVE. And so typically they'll go through here and they'll say, either for container scanning, they'll say, this is a library that never is used, or we don't depend on it, or even we use that library, but it's in a piece of code of that library that's not used. Like maybe it's a vulnerability with regular expressions, and they say, well, we don't do anything with regular expressions. So, we're using other parts of that library, but not this piece of vulnerable code. And so then they'll dismiss it as a false positive. They can also, comment on it to explain why they're dismissing it, so that if somebody goes back later and questions it, they've got a documented trail of why they dismissed it. In addition to the vulnerability report, well, let me stop there. Do you have any questions about that before I move on to the page?
No, that all makes sense. I will say the descriptions here in this example are a lot more understandable than the ones that were in Camille's design. So I'm just wondering, like, is this more typical of the descriptions?
No, so these are other scanners that are
Oh,
producing
okay.
descriptions.
Mhm.
If I come over to, these ones are actually similar to the ones that you saw in her
Yeah.
design, because again, like different scanners find vulnerabilities in different ways. So for like secret detection, we have a list of hard-coded rules that we look for. And so we get to name each one of those with a description that's user-friendly and that makes sense.
Got it.
The container scanning, all it really is a big database comparison. We're creating a big list of all of the packages that are in the image. And then we have a separate database that says these packages have these known vulnerabilities.
Okay.
And so all you're really doing is saying this vulnerability exists in this package. And so they don't all come with descriptions. It would be rather large amount of work to go out and create, descriptions for all of those. Like really these get pulled from like common databases like the MITRE database or the National Vulnerability Database. And so our database has a whole bunch of different databases that come together. And unfortunately in here, there's nothing that's better for a description. There's no title for these. There is this actual description, but that can actually be quite long. It's not really suitable for a title. And so that longer form description is what we showed here typically. I think our description itself actually will come from this NVD database. So
Okay, cool.
So in this particular case, it's nice and short, so that might have made for a nice title, but it can also be like 5 lines long, of really dense text. And so we just highlight like this is the CVE that was found in this particular package.
Cool.
So commonly, that's one way of working, is going through and just kind of triaging these as they come in, because there really are 2 ways that vulnerabilities show up in this report. One way is that somebody introduces a new package into their container image that's vulnerable. And obviously that's something you want to just prevent from happening or triage as it's coming in. But the other method of things showing up here is just by virtue of the fact that our vulnerability database got updated and a package that we previously thought to be clean is now found to actually have vulnerable code in it. So, we have a whole like merge request workflow for triaging these vulnerabilities as well. So that helps cover anything that's incoming. But normally when people are working through this is for their main branch only. This kind of a workflow is for those things that have come up over time that, are a little bit less expected. So it's actually very common. I mean, these databases are huge. You take any software package out there in the world and let it sit for 3 months, and there's a really good chance that there's going to be a vulnerability discovered for that particular package. So, your questions about like, how common is it to have vulnerabilities in? It's very common. Teams it's just a constant chase to kind of keep your latest tagged image up to date so that it doesn't have vulnerabilities. But any image that's older than say 3 months, you're going to have a high 90% chance that you're going to have new vulnerabilities that have popped up since you last checked it.
Right, got it.
So another common question that we get is, a big vulnerability comes out in the news, like Log4j is one that came out recently, but it just varies. Like, this package has a vulnerability and it's a really high profile one. And so all the security teams then go scrambling to answer the question of where is, out of all of the stuff that we're building in my company, where are we using this particular vulnerable package? Because we now have a mandate from, the executive group or the CEO, or just, it's all over the news. So we have to make sure that this is completely cleaned up. And, maybe we have other vulnerabilities out there, but this is like top priority of the moment, is making sure that this particular package gets updated. So we also have our dependency list. And this is useful also for like compliance purposes too, because you have to report out on all of the different packages that are included, upstream dependencies that are included in your project. And so this shows you a big list of everything, regardless of whether it's vulnerable or not. So like this one, we detected a vulnerability, but we're also listing out all of these other packages with their associated versions, even if they don't have vulnerabilities. Again, from a compliance perspective, often they need to generate a SBOM or software bill of materials just to list out everything that they got and where it came from. Because just because the code that you build has been scanned doesn't necessarily mean that all of the dependencies you're pulling in are safe, even if they're not listed in like the National Vulnerability Database. If you're just pulling a package from some random obscure site, obviously that's a security concern in and of itself, because you know, if it's not a well-known, well-maintained source, that can open holes for vulnerabilities that are not covered or not reported. So, you know, it's also really common for them to need to generate this broad list of everything that's being pulled into their project or into their image. So those are really the two pieces of functionality that we show on the project level. And the ideal state would be to show all of these two views, the dependency list and the vulnerability report, on the registry as well. So that's the demo. Let me go back through your questions. Let's see what questions you have and which ones did I not cover yet.
Just while you have this dependency list up, I saw in the designs that there was a tab for the dependency list. I'm wondering how that relates to a container image.
Yeah, so a container image has a bunch of packages installed, like via the apt or the yum package manager or APK, depending on which operating system it is, if you're familiar with those package managers at all. Yep, so all of those packages that are installed would be listed out in that dependency list. Even if they don't have vulnerabilities. That way they have a complete record of everything that's installed in that image.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's interesting. I never knew that we had that information. And like, it's interesting that we don't show that at the moment. I don't know what the user value of that would be, but yeah, it's just interesting.
Yeah, so the user value, again, it's mostly from a compliance perspective. When you're trying to certify and say, you know, our container image is secure, and part of that is proving that you're at least aware of all of the things that are installed on that image. Because if you're not aware of it, like step one is even just being aware of what's installed, you know, let alone like making sure that the upstream sources are secure. And so, you know, producing that list is kind of like the most basic MVC step that most organizations could take to proving that they're in control of what's installed on that image.
Got it. Cool. That makes sense. So just thinking about everything that you just said, one of the things that I find really interesting is basically older images are going to have vulnerabilities because of that, you know, that thing you said about if it's sitting there for 3 months, there'll probably be something discovered. And I'm thinking about the container registry collecting quite a lot of images, but a lot of them being irrelevant because they're, you know, they're going to get cleaned up or they just haven't gotten around to removing them yet. And how that looks on the UI. Because when I see this 5 vulnerabilities found, even if it's on an old image with like a big red thing, it kind of makes me think like, oh, I should really do something about that. But it kind of sounds like if that image is no longer really being used, it's not a big deal. And the only time that we should really highly signal the vulnerabilities are for images that are in use at the moment. Is that kind of like in line? Is that a correct understanding?
So yes and no. It depends on the customer's use case. First of all, we don't have a great way of detecting which ones are in use. Because to know what's in use, you really have to be in the production environment, which we actually just released a feature in alpha that lets us do container image scanning in a production environment as well. I think on the vulnerability report, you saw that development vulnerabilities and operational vulnerabilities tab. That operational vulnerabilities tab is everything coming back from their production environment. So we actually are able to scan and report on what's in use, quote unquote, today. But part of locking down a production Kubernetes environment, if you're really securing it well, you will put a rule in place so that you can only pull images into that Kubernetes environment from a specific registry. And then the attention shifts from, okay, let's make sure everything in production is secure, to let's make sure everything in this registry is secure, so that there is, there's nothing vulnerable here that could be pulled in to production. So that's why those older ones can still be important depending on what they're using the registry for. Not, I'm sure there's a wide range of like how much level of adoption that people have for our container registry. But if they're on the high end of that scale and they are fully adopting it and they're locking it down in that way, then you are going to have customers that will want all of the images in that registry to be fully secure. As regardless, like if they're old, then they will go and clean them up because they don't want to have anything in there that's vulnerable.
Yeah.
So it kind of just depends, I suppose.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I guess it's just how much precedent should it take on the UI, because I'm imagining if every single thing in the registry's got a red badge on it, it might be quite stressful. But if my organization is like not very high security or just has a bunch of old stuff in there, it could be it kind of like you don't want to create noise, because when there is a vulnerability that they really need to do something about, we want them to pay attention to it. I guess that's my concern.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And you're right. We need to think carefully about how we roll up the vulnerabilities. So if you're looking at vulnerabilities for a specific tag, like, yeah, of course you should see all of them. But if you're looking at the image level, like not going down into a specific tag, but looking at all the images, normally you're probably going to want to filter that list for just those tags that you care about at the moment.
Yeah.
You may want to see it for all tags in that use case that I described, right? Where you're trying to lock everything in the registry down. But on the other hand, if you are just, have a few that are primarily in use or that are like latest tags or published tags, because it's more than just latest. So certainly latest would be included, but you might also have certain other tagged releases that are actively in use. So you would want to highlight those over everything else. And so how do we designate which tags are the important tags versus not, I suppose would be a design question to consider.
Yeah, we have this design concept for a future version that's probably not going to align, but just for context of people often visit the UI to see that an image or a tag published correctly. And at the moment, we have this big list of image repositories and you actually need to click in to see the tag. And I'm kind of thinking like, if we have this section for like recent activity, if one of those recent ones has a vulnerability, you're probably going to care. So yeah, I'm imagining like maybe a future version, I think people mostly care about the tags published most recently. So if we could like bubble that up in some way, but obviously that won't be for the MVC.
Yeah, that makes great sense. That's a great line of thinking to go down for sure.
Yeah. Just looking at my question. So how urgent is responding to a vulnerability?
Depends, like, obviously the higher severity it is, the more important it is. Typically, most organizations strive for no criticals at all. They try to have no highs, but one or two highs can sometimes be acceptable. Mediums and lows are generally ignored for the most part. So the severity matters a whole lot. You ask, will we be like signaling these in any other way? So eventually we'd like to have some sort of alerting mechanism for new vulnerabilities that are discovered. And that's even further down the priority list than this, but sending them an email notification or perhaps even a notification inside of GitLab. We actually have a whole security alert dashboard that we've built out in GitLab as well that does not do alerts for new vulnerabilities yet, but that's the vision, is to add those in. So we would like to do some alerting at some point for new things. Generally, even for urgent things though, like most organizations operate on a matter of days. So it's usually not like,
Right, okay.
it's not like seconds or minutes to respond to these types of things.
Yeah,
Our
got it.
vulnerability update database is updated once per day, just for context as well. So, you know, that's the cadence that we're operating on. So they wouldn't even get notification of new vulnerabilities more frequently than that.
Got it. Okay, that's cool. And do you have cases where this vulnerabilities is kind of integrated into other features in GitLab?
We do.
Because there might be some good learnings there.
Yeah, so the big one is merge requests, because this deals with stuff that's incoming, that's new. You know, here we highlight, we detect vulnerabilities, you know, and this actually does a differential comparison on the incoming branch versus the target branch, you know, versus the main branch. So these would be new ones that are introduced. You see it's all related to this MariaDB package. And if we look at the change, you know, we're adding in this new MariaDB package, installing it into their container image. And that one's full of vulnerabilities. So, you know, this then triggers a vulnerability check. It requires special approval from a member of the security team, you know, whereas otherwise it just would need general approval from like another developer. But this actually routes it over to the security team to review and sign off on the new vulnerabilities that are coming in.
Got it.
That's one other place. Another place that we are in the process of turning this on for, let's see if it's there yet. We might have just turned on the feature flag for this recently. Not yet. We're introducing a new security tab here for the Kubernetes cluster itself, so that you can see what vulnerabilities are actually exist on containers that are running in production in this Kubernetes cluster specifically.
Right, okay.
That is being turned on as we speak. It just isn't quite on yet, it looks like.
Yeah, cool, that makes sense. I'm just thinking about how to represent this in the UI. So the vulnerability is actually attached to the tag, but we could potentially show like an amalgamated view of like this image repository has 5 tags and 2 of those tags have vulnerabilities. I was just thinking about like what is the information actually attached to, because it was really interesting seeing that, you know, the merge request is a single thing and the vulnerability is attached to the merge request. And it's kind of, I feel like this attaching it to the image repository level is actually just showing which tags in that image repository have which vulnerabilities. Is that right?
That is right.
Okay.
For the first MVC, we are only going to be scanning the latest tagged image. And then we'll do a follow-on to scan all of the other tags. So that is just something to note.
Okay, cool.
In there. But
the latest tag.
It will essentially be associated with the tag level.
Right, okay. Oh, okay, so yeah, we'll have to, and do you mean literally it is tagged latest, only those in, okay, cool.
Yeah,
okay.
Because our database schema doesn't support associating it with a specific tag as of yet. And that's a rather large change. So we're only going to scan things if they are tagged latest for the first iteration. And then when we add in that new column, anything that's already there, we can pre-fill it with latest, and then we can start scanning other tags as well. But we don't have a column to store the tag name as of yet.
Cool, that makes sense. Yeah, I was thinking about the way, I know we'll do solution validation, but I was thinking the tag name might not be sufficient if we're showing an amalgamated view of all image tags in the image repository. I'm guessing that the user might need more information because these names are often like a commit SHA, and they might want to see like when was it uploaded or something like that. Do you think that that would be possible to show in the list of vulnerabilities?
Yeah, I would say just design it for a good user experience and then let the engineers push back if there's a problem there, I think that would be a great addition to show the last updated date alongside. The
Yeah.
beginning.
Yeah. Let me just flip back to my questions. I saw you answered some of them. So the possible actions, they can basically triage it or not. It was interesting seeing that merge request example. It seems like there's not really actions that they take maybe directly from the merge request, but I saw a button that said view full report.
Yeah, we didn't. There actually are actions that you can take there as well. Let's come back in here. Yeah, so I can expand this out and I can click on any one of these and it pops up the details for me to review. And I can create a linked issue for this. Same thing with back there. I can create an issue, I can dismiss the vulnerability, or I can add a comment and dismiss it. So we have some quick actions there in line. And then if I click view full report, yeah, I forgot to mention this. This actually is on the pipeline view. We have a tab called security for each pipeline that gets run. So you can go to CI/CD pipelines, and then there's a security tab. And again, you can filter by severity and tool, and we have a bunch of different, actions here: dismiss vulnerability, create issue, get more information. Same thing, kind of this bulk select. So really, we would just be taking this same. I think we've worked to make this mostly a reusable component, and we would be dropping it in under a security tab somewhere in the registry.
Okay, cool.
Probably be the simplest thing to do.
Yeah, so I can imagine the security tab. So I'm in the container registry. I click on one of the image repositories that has a security tab that shows all the vulnerabilities for all the tags eventually. I know not for the MVC, and then has these kind of bulk actions. And then I can also switch back to the list of all the image tags in the repository, click on a tag, and then see only the vulnerabilities associated with that tab. Like that could be the like future state of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, users are going to want to review these at all of the different levels. Like they're going to want to review it for their entire registry as a whole, because they're going to want to say, again, like the log4j example, out of all of my whole registry, I want to know where log4j exists, because I've been tasked with a mandate to purge, make sure that everything is off log4j 2.0.2 and go up to 2.0.3. I don't remember the exact versions of the vulnerability, but I need to, that's my job for the day, is making sure that log4j is gone from our container registry. So at that case, you would actually want something at this top level, for the entire container registry, versus, another potential workflow is, there's nothing burning like that today. I just need to go in, to these more individually and see which things have come up new, mostly looking for criticals and some at highs to see, like you said, if, for anything that's actually being used, are there criticals and highs in those, images that are used. So you want to see it at this high level, but then you also want to drill in and drill in and drill in to view it at, various points.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I don't think Camilla's yet accounted for that top level, everything in the container registry view. But I do see that actually as super helpful, because looking at the designs, it's kind of like each thing's had many vulnerabilities, and that's quite a lot of admin, but I might just actually care about the critical ones for the entire registry. So it would prevent me from having to go into each image repository. And that might be like the most useful view.
Correct. Yeah, in aggregate, you're going to have a lot of total vulnerabilities, but then they're immediately going to start using those filters to drill it down to what they're actually looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, so I wonder if the aggregate view should be the priority, or at least included in the MVC, because I think that could be quite useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And we may not need to create all of the views for the initial MVC. We can probably pick one of the views to start with and then add in the others over time.
Yeah, my hunch is like that aggregate view is probably the most useful one. Because yeah, there are some users that have lots and lots and lots of image repositories. So it would just be quite a lot of manual admin. Now understanding that this is going to be quite a common thing, and that it's likely that every image repository will have vulnerabilities.
Yep.
And yeah, it's kind of like, I actually just need to know about the really bad ones.
Exactly. Yeah, there usually are like even thousands of lows and mediums, but those generally tend to get mostly ignored.
Yeah, I wonder if I know like the settings is out of scope for the MVC, but eventually we should just allow the users to be like, which ones should I be notified about when I'm looking at my container registry? Because I feel like the way that it is in the designs at the moment, where it shows on the main container registry page how many vulnerabilities are found, like it feels like if they're mostly lows, it will just be noise. Like I don't know if that's actually the right visual treatment, because it could just be very easy to ignore if they're on every single one.
Yeah, if we're just showing aggregate vulnerabilities, that is going to be problematic. I mean, I like what we're doing here, you know, in the merge request, one critical, one high, and then 20 others. I mean, that's generally what how people think about it too. They're like, okay, how many criticals, how many highs, and then everything else just sort of gets bucketed into this like, oh, okay, that's nice. You know, we've got our vulnerabilities. I'm not going to worry about them.
Yeah, I love that actually. I'm imagining like on the container registry page, if we just had some kind of in the top of the page or something, we had something similar to that. And then you can view all of them in aggregate, and then only showing on the list of the individual image repositories. If the image repository has a critical or high, we would show that number. And if it has like a low, maybe we don't show it, just so the user can kind of focus on what's important.
Yeah, for sure. And also worth noting, like on this vulnerability report page, we do also have this like summary of how many vulnerabilities for each thing. This actually, it's a little bit counterintuitive. We're working through the design on this, having a lot of design discussions about this right now in Secure, but these numbers do actually update when you change these down here as well. So if I filter just by critical, you see all those go away. It is a little bit counterintuitive because the filters are below the number instead of above. So again, like we're working through that design wise, but we do have this sort of a concept in GitLab that we could probably reuse if needed as well.
Yeah, I feel like it's a bit heavy because the point of the container registry page is not vulnerabilities, but I think a similar thing to what you showed me on the merge request would be awesome. Just like a count of the most important ones. And then on the table list, showing that this image repository has got a critical, you need to investigate it, especially if it's at the top of the list because it's published recently, you probably care about that.
Yep.
And yeah, maybe not showing it on every single image repository.
Yeah, if this was all behind a security tab or something like that, you know, then you might want to introduce it, but I don't know. Food for thought.
Yeah, that's cool. Oh, that's really helpful to understand. Just going through my questions. So vulnerabilities will be common. I saw that this feature will be released in 6 to 12 months. I think that kind of resolves my question because the tag list is a unsorted list at the moment, but it will be sortable soon. And yeah, I think that's really important for this work because you probably care most about the ones that were published recently. And at the moment, they just come in any old order. Let's see, the risks of having this on by default, like are there performance concerns? I would love to have features enabled by default. I just want to make sure that it's not going to harm the user experience in any way.
Well, harm it in any way might be a little bit strong.
Not harm it severely then.
You know, there is going to be a performance impact for sure. We're hoping to do this in a way that it has good performance. And we would definitely need to prove that out before we switched it to default to on. So we believe, you know, we hypothesize that we've got a good engineering solution that will provide decent performance, but we're not going to really know that for certain until we actually go down the path of implementing it.
Yeah, that's cool. And yeah, and then we can make an educated guess. I guess the other thing, which will probably come out more in solution validation, is in terms of enabling it by default. If all of a sudden my container registry is filled with alerts, and I see the MVC will not have like any kind of UI setting to turn this off, like it will be some kind of manual process. Just making sure that for users who are not so concerned with vulnerabilities, that we don't create a lot of noise for them and make it really hard for them to turn the feature off. But I think that we can just kind of figure that out in solution validation, and maybe adjusting the designs that I've seen to highlight the severe warnings on the container registry, like main page, just so the main point of that page is like, I can find the image repository that I'm looking for. And if there's a security issue, I can get a heads up, but it's not like the main focus of the page.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I'll let you work with Camellia on that. From a product management perspective, I don't know that I have a strong opinion on how you structure it.
Yeah, that's cool. And then will the customer be able to understand the vulnerability UI? I guess that will also come out in solution validation. We obviously have technical users who might be like very familiar with this. I wasn't, but that just could be a me thing.
Yeah, and many of these users are going to be like, if they're coming over to a security tab, they're probably on the security team, you know, or familiar already with our vulnerability list that we have in GitLab, because most security teams are already using that. So as long as we keep the experience consistent between the two, it's not going to be entirely new for them. It'll be a pretty easy learning curve.
Yeah. Do you ever find in any research like that? Are there certain user types that should not be interacting with this? Or is it kind of you show it to everyone and everyone can do the actions?
Yeah, so the only users that shouldn't see this are like guest users or, you know, people outside the organization. We believe a big part of our value statement is shifting security left. So we intentionally make this visible to all of the developers, because the developers are the ones that are coding it up, and they're the ones ultimately that have to resolve these things. So even though you've got a security team going through and triaging them and commenting on them, it ultimately gets kicked back to the developers anyway. So it 100% makes sense for them to see it. Really, anyone with developer or higher permissions is able to see anything in the vulnerability report.
Okay, cool, got it. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess it's kind of, if the wrong user type does the wrong action, it hopefully won't break anything. Or I guess that was my main question.
Yeah, I mean, again, we'll block this on like developer access, but the biggest making sure that, you know, you wouldn't want like external users coming in and dismissing vulnerabilities, for example. That would be problematic. In fact, them even just seeing them could potentially be problematic if you're ready to disclose it, you know, but that's pretty easy to gate on, you know, with the licenses that we have.
Cool, that makes sense. Cool, I think that was all of my questions. Thank you so much for all of the information. That's super helpful. I'm sorry we've gone 10 minutes over.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I'm glad we could answer them. And again, I don't overlap with Camellia at all. So if you want to sync up with her separately, please feel free to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I think she's on holiday this week, so it's maybe next week.
She might, I think she is, yes.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, I'll try to sync up with her next week then.
Sounds good. Well, thanks.
Thank you so much for setting this up. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.